right, Chapter 7, Part 5. Dinner was remarkably pleasant. The burnt smell had gone from the kitchen, the chicken was good, the salad was better, the roast potatoes were too crispy, but a delighted Mr. Frost had proclaimed that this was precisely the way he liked them, and he had taken a second helping. The flowers were popular, the chocolates, which they had for dessert, were perfect, and Mr. Frost sat and talked and then watched television with them until about 10 p.m., when he said that he needed to get home. "Time, tide, and historical research wait for no man," he said. He shook Nuna's hand with enthusiasm, winked at Scarlet conspiratorially, and then was out the door. Scarlet tried to find Bod in her dreams that night. She thought of him as she went to sleep, imagined herself walking the graveyard looking for him, but when she did dream, it was of wandering around Glasgow city centre with her friends from her old school. They were hunting for a specific street, but all they found was a succession of dead ends, one after the other. Deep beneath the hill in Krakow, in the deepest vault beneath the caves they call the Dragon's Den, Miss Lupescu stumbled and fell. Silas crouched beside her and cradled Miss Lupescu's head in his hands. There was blood on her face, and some of it was hers. "You must leave me," she said. "Save the boy." She was halfway now, halfway between Grey Wolf and woman, but her face was a woman's face. "No," said Silas, "I won't leave you." Behind him, Kondar cradled its piglet like a child might hold a doll. The mummy's left wing was shattered, and it would never fly again, but its bearded face was implacable. "They will come back, Silas," Miss Lupescu whispered. "Too soon. The sun will rise." "Then," said Silas, "we must deal with them before they are ready to attack. Can you stand?" "Da! I am one of the hounds of God," she said. And Miss Lupescu, "I will stand." She lowered her face into the shadows, flexed her fingers. When she raised her head again, it was a wolf's head. She put her front paws down on the rock and laboriously pushed herself up into a standing position. A gray wolf bigger than a bear, her coat and muzzle flecked with blood. She threw back her head and howled, a howl of fury and of challenge. Her lips curled back from her teeth, and she lowered her head once more. "Now," growled Miss Lupescu, "we end this." Late on Sunday afternoon, the telephone rang. Scarlet was sitting downstairs, laboriously copying facts from her manga she had been reading onto a scrap of paper. Her mother picked up the phone. "Funny, we were just talking about you," said her mother, although they hadn't been. It was wonderful," her mother continued. "I had the best time. Honestly, it was no trouble. The chocolates, they were perfect, just perfect. I told Scarlet to tell you, any time you want a good dinner, you just let me know." And then, "Scarlet? Yes, she's here. I'll put her on. Scarlet!" "I'm just here, Mum," said Scarlet. "You don't have to shout." She took the phone. "Mr. Frost?" "Scarlet!" He sounded excited. The thing we were talking about, the thing that happened in my house, you can tell this friend of yours that I found out, listen, when you said a friend of yours, did you really mean it in the sense of we're actually talking about you, or is there a real person, if it's not a personal question?" "I've got a real friend who wants to know," said Scarlet, amused. Her mother shot her a puzzled look. "Tell your friend that I did some digging." "Did some digging? Not literally, more like rummaging. Well, a fair amount of actual looking around, and I think I might have unearthed some very real information, stumbled over something hidden. Well, not something I think we should spread around. I found things out." "Like what?" asked Scarlet. "Look, don't think I'm mad, but, well, as far as I can tell, 3 people were killed. One of them, the baby, I think, wasn't. It wasn't a family of 3. It was a family of 4. Only 3 of them died. Tell him to come and see me, your friend. I'll fill him in." "I'll tell him," said Scarlet. She put down the phone. Her heart was beating like a snare. Bod walked down the narrow stone stairs for the first time in 6 years. His footsteps echoed in the chamber inside the hill. He reached the bottom of the steps, waited for the sleer to manifest, and he waited and waited, but nothing appeared, nothing whispered, nothing moved. He looked around the chamber, untroubled by the deep darkness, seeing it as the Dead Sea. He walked over to the altar stone set in the floor, where the cup and the brooch and the stone knife sat. He reached down and touched the edge of the knife. It was sharper than he had expected, and it nicked at the skin of his finger. "It is the treasure of the Sleer," whispered a triple voice, but it sounded smaller than he remembered, more hesitant. Bod said, "You're the oldest thing here. I came to talk to you. I want advice." A pause. "Nothing comes to the Sleer for advice. The Sleer guards. The Sleer waits." "I know, but Silas isn't here, and I don't know who else to talk to." Nothing was said, just silence in reply that echoed of dust and loneliness. "I don't know what to do," Bod said honestly. "I think I can find out about who killed my family, who wanted to kill me. It means leaving the graveyard, though." The Sleer said nothing. Smoke tendrils twined slowly around the inside of the chamber. "I'm not frightened of dying," said Bod. "It's just so many people I care about have spent so much time keeping me safe, teaching me, protecting me." Again, silence. Then he said, "I have to do this on my own." "Yes." "That's all then. Sorry I bothered you." It whispered into Bod's head. Then, in a voice that was a sleek, insinuating glide, "The Sleer was set to guard the treasure until our master returned. Are you our master?" "No," said Bod. And then, with a hopeful whine, "Will you be our master?" "I'm afraid not." "If you were our master, we could hold you in our coils forever. If you were our master, we would keep you safe and protect you until the end of time and never let you endure the dangers of the world." "I am not your master." "No." Bod felt the Sleer writhing through his mind. It said, "Then find your name." And his mind was empty, and the room was empty, and Bod was alone. Bod walked back up the stairs carefully, yet quickly. He had come to a decision and needed to act fast, while the decision still burned in his mind. Scarlet was waiting for him on the bench by the chapel. "Well," she said. "I'll do it. Come on," he said, and side by side they walked the path down to the graveyard gates. Number 33 was a tall house, spindly thin in the middle of a terraced row. It was red brick and unmemorable. Bod looked at it uncertainly, wondering why it did not seem familiar or special. It was only a house, like any other. There was a small concreted space in front of it that wasn't a garden. A green Mini parked on the street. The front door had once been painted a bright blue, but had been dimmed by time and the sun. "Well?" said Scarlet. Bod knocked on the door. There was nothing. Then a clatter of feet on the stairs from inside, and the door opened to reveal an entryway and stairs. Framed in the doorway was a bespectacled man with receding gray hair, who blinked at them and then stuck out his hand at Bod, and smiled nervously and said, "You must be Miss Perkins' mysterious friend. Good to meet you." "This is Bod," said Scarlet. "Bob?" "Bod, with a D," she said. "Bod, this is Mr. Frost." Bod and Frost shook hands. "Kettle's on," said Mr. Frost. "What say we swap information over a cuppa?" They followed him up the steps to the kitchen, where he poured 3 mugs of tea, then led them into a small sitting room. "The house just keeps going up," he said. "The toilet's on the next floor up in my office, then bedrooms above that. Keeps you fit, all the stairs." They sat on a large, extremely purple sofa. It was already here when I came, and they sipped their tea. Scarlet had worried that Mr. Frost would ask Bod lots of questions, but he didn't. He just seemed excited, as if he had identified the lost gravestone of someone famous and desperately wanted to tell the world. He kept moving impatiently in his chair as if he had something enormous to impart to them, and not blurting it out immediately was a physical strain. Scarlet said, "So, what did you find out?" Mr. Frost said, "Well, you were right. I mean, this was the house where those people were killed, and I think the crime was, well, not exactly hushed up, but forgotten about, let go by the authorities." "I don't understand," said Scarlet. "Murders don't get swept under the carpet." "This one was," said Frost. He drained his tea. "There are people out there who have influence. It's the only explanation for that, and for what happened to the youngest child." "And what was that?" asked Bod. "He lived," said Frost. "I'm sure of it. But there wasn't a manhunt. A missing toddler normally would be national news, but they must have squashed it somehow." "Who are they?" asked Bod. "The same people who had the family killed." "Do you know any more than that?" "Yes, well, a little," Frost trailed off. "I'm sorry. Look, given what I found, it's all too incredible." Scarlet was starting to feel frustrated. What did you find?" Frost looked shamefaced. "You're right. I'm sorry. Getting into keeping secrets, not a good idea. Historians don't bury things. We dig them up. Show people. Yes." He stopped, hesitated. Then he said, "I found a letter. Upstairs. It was hidden under a loose floorboard." He turned to Bod. "Young man, would I be correct in assuming your interest in this business, this dreadful business, is personal?" Bod nodded. "I won't ask any more," said Mr. Frost, and he stood up. "Come on," he said to Bod. "Not you, though," to Scarlet. "Not yet. I'll show him, and if he says it's all right, I'll show you as well. Deal?" "Deal," said Scarlet. "We won't be long," said Mr. Frost. "Come on, lad." Bod stood up, darted a concerned look at Scarlet. "It's okay," she said, and smiled at him reassuringly as she could. "I'll wait here for you." She watched their shadows as they walked out of the room and upstairs and up the stairs. She felt nervous but expectant. She wondered what Bod would learn, and was happy that he would learn it first. It was his story after all. It was his right. Out on the stairs, Mr. Frost led the way. Bod looked around as he walked up toward the top of the house, but nothing seemed familiar. It all seemed strange. "All the way to the very top," said Mr. Frost. They went up another flight of stairs. He said, "I don't... Well, you don't have to answer if you don't want to, but, you're the boy, aren't you?" Bod said nothing. "Here we are," said Mr. Frost. He turned the key in the door at the top of the house, pushed it open, and they went inside. The room was small, an attic room with sloping ceilings. 13 years before, it had held a crib. It barely held the man and the boy. "Stroke of luck, really," said Mr. Frost. "Under my own nose, so to speak." He crouched down, pulled back the threadbare carpet. So you know why my family were murdered?" asked Bod. Mr. Frost said, "It's all in here." He reached down to a short length of floorboard and pushed at it until he was able to lever it out. "This would have been the baby's room," said Mr. Frost. "I'll show you the only thing we don't know is just who did it. Nothing at all. We don't have the tiniest clue." "We know he has dark hair," said Bod, in the room that once had been his bedroom, "and we know that his name is Jack." Mr. Frost put his hand down into the empty space where the floorboards had been. "It's been almost 13 years, he said, "and hair gets thin and goes gray in 13 years. But yes, that's right. It's Jack." He straightened up. The hand that had been in the hole in the floor was holding a long, sharp knife. "Now," said the man Jack. "Now, boy, time to finish this." Now that was a surprise.